Coming up, playoff spots are on the line. Other teams are looking to play spoiler in the second to last week of the regular season. This is Locked On Game to Game NFL.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You are listening to Locked On Game to Game NFL, local experts taking you from game to game, previewing the matchups for Week 17 of the NFL season. I am your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. The Ravens have already clinched their spot in the playoffs, while the Steelers are still holding out hope that there's a chance at the wild card. Locked On Ravens and Steelers are in to go over the keys to a win for their team on Sunday.
The Baltimore Ravens have to continue their dominance on the ground in Week 17 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I am Kevin Ostreicher, the host over at Locked On Ravens, and this is Baltimore's second and final matchup of 2022 with Pittsburgh. In the first matchup, Baltimore ran the football at a very efficient clip, 42 times, 5.1 yards per carry, led by J.K. Dobbins, who had a monster game. Gus Edwards also in there as well. There's a lot of uncertainty right now surrounding the status of Lamar Jackson, who did not practice on Wednesday. So if not, likely Tyler Huntley will step behind center again. On defense, Baltimore forced 3 key interceptions on Mitch Trubisky deep into Baltimore territory in that first game. So with Kenny Pickett now at the helm, can they do the same against the rookie quarterback who has seen some success this year at the NFL level? This is a pivotal game for both the Ravens and the Steelers in multiple different ways. So whoever wins will definitely be feeling good about themselves heading into Week 18. For more on this Ravens-Steelers matchup and the Ravens, be sure to follow the Locked On Ravens podcast and subscribe on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
I'm Chris Carter for the Locked On Steelers podcast, and this is your key for the Steelers to find a way to pull off the upset in Baltimore against the Ravens in Week 17. It's very similar to their keys to try to beat them when they were at Acrisure Stadium just a few weeks ago. Stop the run, control the line of scrimmage. The Ravens in that game rushed for 215 yards in a 16-14 win over the Steelers. Even though the defense did hold the Ravens to less than 2 touchdowns and a field goal, it was still enough to beat the Steelers in a day where Mitch Trubisky threw 3 interceptions. But still, those numbers wouldn't have been put up if they were able to contain players like J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards in the run game. But since then, the Steelers have taken it upon themselves to play better on defense. Cam Hayward, Miles Jack, Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt, all of them talked about it. Wasn't that they were out-schemed against the Ravens before. They just got outplayed, and they had to be more physical at the point of attack. And since then, you've seen it. They only allowed 21 yards rushing to the Carolina Panthers, and they only allowed 58 yards to the Las Vegas Raiders, who have the NFL's leading rusher in Josh Jacobs, and limited him to less than 3 yards per carry, the lowest he's had all season long. But now the matchup returns to the Baltimore Ravens. It's going to be interesting to see, can that defensive front keep it up for yet another game? Cam Hayward has been playing out of his mind the last couple of weeks and through most of this season, and he has helped kind of rejuvenate what the Steelers need on their defensive front. If they're able to take out the Ravens run game, even if Lamar Jackson does return this week, it gives the Steelers a chance to control the pace of this game. And even if their offense takes time to figure it out like they did against the Raiders, they'll most likely be in a position where late in the game could come down to just making a couple big plays for the Steelers to pull off the upset and keep their playoff hopes alive.
Win or lose this week, the Jags are probably already looking ahead to next week when they'll play the Titans for the AFC South title. Locked On Jaguars previews this week's warm-up in Houston.
The Jaguars have to stay focused on the game at hand. I'm Tony Wiggins, the host of Locked On Jaguars. Here's the Jaguars' keys to victory against the Houston Texans. Remember that Houston beat them early in the season. They need to pay attention to what's in front of them and not what's ahead of them, and look forward too much to their showdown for the AFC South with the Tennessee Titans the following week. The Houston Texans have played hard all year, especially the last 3 games. I think if the Jaguars want to keep their momentum heading into that game against the Titans, they need to keep their momentum by beating the Houston Texans. Trevor Lawrence needs a turnover-free game. They need to convert third downs and get Houston off the field when they have the football. Make sure you check me out on Locked On Jaguars podcast, where it's your team every day. And we thank you for making us your first listen.
One more victory will clinch the top seed in the NFC for the Eagles, but Philly doesn't know if Jalen Hurts will be back in time to lead them to that win. With the Saints waiting for whoever's under center, Locked On Eagles has the keys to clinching home field through the playoffs.
Running the football is going to be extremely important for the Eagles to get a win on Sunday against the New Orleans Saints. I'm Louis DiBiase, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast. The magic number is 1 for the Birds. 1 win to clinch the number 1 seed in the NFC and the NFC East Division Championship, but it's not going to be easy against the Saints, who in their own right are battling for the NFC South Division title. The Eagles might not have Jalen Hurts in this game. We know they don't have Lane Johnson, their star right tackle. Wide receiver A.J. Brown was a limited participant in Wednesday's practice. The key to this game to take the pressure off Gardner Minshew as he goes up against the number 2 ranked passing defense in all of football in New Orleans is running the ball. Grit and grind, a win is a win no matter how you get it on Sunday. You got to lock up this number 1 seed. So do it in a dirty way. Do it how you know best. Go through the interior of your elite offensive line and run the ball through Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell. That's going to be the key against a middle-of-the-road Saints run defense. Get that gritty win on Sunday. I'm Louis DiBiase, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The top 2 teams in the lowly NFC South meet in Tampa this week. The Panthers need to win to keep their playoff chances alive, and Locked On Panthers tells us how Carolina can make that happen.
The Carolina Panthers need to play their brand of football if they're going to win on the road against Tampa Bay. Hi, I'm Julian Council, the host of the Locked On Panthers podcast. The Carolina Panthers have a massive game on Sunday afternoon in Tampa Bay. If the Panthers win, they keep their playoff hopes alive for one more week. They will also need to win on the road against New Orleans, but a loss would end their playoff hopes as Tampa Bay would win the NFC South for the 2nd straight season. We saw earlier this season when the Carolina Panthers had won back-to-back games for the first time all year, had won on the road for the first time all year against Seattle, that they could not handle prosperity against Pittsburgh. The Panthers have to be able to do that, and the way to do it is by winning at the line of scrimmage. Interim head coach Steve Wilkes has talked about for his team, it all starts up front, whether it's on the defensive line or the offensive line. The Panthers have to dominate up front like they did in Saturday's triumphant win against the Detroit Lions, rushing for 220 yards and holding the Lions to 45 yards rushing. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers only have the 18th best rushing defense in the NFL. The Carolina Panthers should be able to feast. They already showed earlier this year that they can control this game with a 21-3 win earlier against the Bucs at Bank of America Stadium. So the Panthers need to play their brand of style, their brand of football if they want to be able to beat Tampa Bay. For more on your Carolina Panthers in this weekend's massive matchup, be sure to check out the Locked On Panthers podcast every Monday through Friday, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Coming up, can the Broncos finally stop the bleeding against the Chiefs? This is Locked On Game to Game NFL. Today's edition of Locked On Game to Game is brought to you by BetOnline. It is the #1 spot for all of your online sports betting needs. No matter what sport you are interested in betting on, football, basketball, hockey, whatever you want to place your bets on, you can do that at betonline.net. Welcome back to Locked On Game to Game NFL. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you again for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. Once upon a time, Russell Westbrook and Patrick Mahomes were supposed to help make the AFC West the very best division in football. Instead, Kansas City ran away with the division again. Denver fired its first-year head coach. Locked On Chiefs has more going into the Week 17 matchup.
The Kansas City Chiefs' key to victory this week is very simple. It is do not turn the ball over. I am Chris Clark, host of Locked On Chiefs. Thank you for listening to this show. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to this team, but the key for this team going forward, and it has been continued to be a key for the past several weeks, is they have continued to turn the ball over up until they played the Seattle Seahawks. At that point, they did not turn the ball over once. That is the first game in 10 games where they did not have a turnover. If they want to play against the Denver Broncos, they want to beat the Denver Broncos, it is very simple. Hold on to the ball. Do not turn the ball over. The last time these teams played, they had 3 turnovers. Mahomes had 3 picks against that Denver Bronco team. That is definitely not something you want to do, especially with the Bronco team that's going to have a little bit more to play for with the new coach coming in this week to Arrowhead. For more on this game and more on the Chiefs, check out the Locked On Chiefs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Desmond Ridder and the Falcons are going to host the Cardinals without Kyler Murray. Locked On Falcons looks at Atlanta's keys to getting the rookie his first win.
turnovers hold the key to victory for the Atlanta Falcons in Week 17. I'm Aaron Freeman, host of Locked On Falcons. In Week 17, the Falcons face off against the Arizona Cardinals, who have turned the ball over at least twice in each of their last 5 games for a total of 12 giveaways. Opposing teams have scored 38 points off of those Cardinals turnovers, roughly a touchdown per game. And that's music to the ears of the Falcons, as taking the ball away has not been that common for the Falcons in 2022. But when they do, the team is 2-0 when they've had a positive turnover margin in their favor. And all 5 of their wins this season have come in games when the Falcons defense has been at least able to produce 1 takeaway. If the Cardinals continue to throw and fumble the ball away for a 6th week in a row, that should be the boost the Falcons need to snap their 4-game losing streak. For more coverage of this Week 17 matchup between the Falcons and Cardinals, follow Locked On Falcons, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Cleveland can play spoiler this weekend with a win over the Commanders, and Locked On Browns looks into how to keep Washington from controlling its own fate next week.
This is Locked On Browns host Jeff Lloyd with your Browns keys to victory Sunday in Washington against the Commanders. The weather will be much more favorable. We're talking about a difference in almost 70 degrees, the weather the Browns will play in Sunday in Washington. The key is simple. Unleash Deshaun Watson. You finally got him in a prime opportunity. There is no pressure. Now, with the Browns being eliminated from playoff contention, give the ball to number 4. Let him shake off whatever rust is remaining after a 700-day layoff, and let him get in sync with his guys. Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Njoku, whether it's David Bell or the other rookie, Michael Woods, this passing game needs to get on track so they can find exactly what is going to be in the system for 2023 and what is going to be out, and what personnel is going to be in for 2023 and what personnel is going to be out. Check out Locked On Browns wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube and on Roku.
The Colts would keep the Giants from clinching a playoff spot with a win in East Rutherford on Sunday, hoping to keep things respectable after just 3 points last week. Locked On Colts has the keys to an Indianapolis upset win.
I don't think that I'm going to surprise very many of you, but the Indianapolis Colts might be in for a bit of a doozy this Sunday afternoon in the Meadowlands against the New York Giants. This is Jake Arthur of the Locked On Colts podcast. So normally each week I tell you guys some big factor that I'm looking for the Colts to do where they can exploit the opponent, usually on defense, because the offense has been the part of the field that's struggled no matter what. But let's be honest, at this point, it rarely happens. So, I don't think anything is going to work at all until Nick Foles, gets on the same page with his receivers, get the timing down with these pass catchers, and the turnovers have got to stop. We kind of thought that still might be the case even with Foles coming in last week. This tells you all you need to know about this Colts team this year. Last year, they finished tied for the tops in the league with a positive 14 turnover differential. This year, they're last at negative 13. So you're not going to go anywhere if that is the kind of performance you're spitting out. But with all that said, there is an area I think the Colts could be effective against this Giants defense. Wink Martindale could really throw the kitchen sink at Nick Foles. So let's see, if there's anything they can do. So first, the Giants defense does rank near the bottom of the league. They're 29th in run defense. They're also middle of the road in pass defense, but Pro Football Focus has them ranked 31st out of 32 in pass coverage as a defense. For me, that screams play action. Get a little bit of the run established with Zach Moss. He's not been spectacular, but he's been effective. Just do enough to make the Giants defense know that, hey, we can run the ball a little bit. And outside of that, take some plays downfield. They tried last week. It didn't work very well overall, but when they targeted Jelani Woods early, it worked well. I think they could have done more with Alec Pierce, but of course they kind of pulled the ripcord and didn't do any of that in the second half last week. But I think that could maybe tell a different story if they try it and stick with it throughout the entirety of the game on Sunday. For more on the Colts, stay tuned to the Locked On Colts podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Both the New York Jets and the Seattle Seahawks need a win this weekend to keep any small playoff hopes alive. With New York still fighting at the bottom of the AFC East, Locked On Jets has the keys to victory for New York.
The New York Jets must protect Mike White to beat the Seattle Seahawks on Sunday. I'm John, the host of the Locked On Jets podcast, and the Jets faced a critical game this Sunday in Seattle against the Seahawks. Their season is on the line. The good news is Mike White will be returning to the lineup. The Jets get their quarterback back after missing the previous 2 games with a rib injury. White has been able to execute Mike LaFleur's offense effectively in his previous 3 starts this season. He's found the open guy and has delivered the ball accurately. However, he does not have a lot of mobility. He's not the type of guy who can create plays on his own. And in his last game against the Buffalo Bills, a game where he got injured, he just took too many big hits. If the Jets can keep White upright, they'll have a shot to win. He'll be able to get the ball where it needs to go. They should have a good day throwing the ball. It's just a matter of protection. For more on the Jets, tune into the Locked On Jets podcast every Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, free and available on all platforms. Your team every day.
That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Game to Game NFL. Thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On NFL and, of course, your favorite team's Locked On podcast on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts from. I'm Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.